Is there a benefit to finding out you're autistic when you're young versus finding out later in life? We're going to discuss that in today's video. Recently, Tallulah Willis, the youngest daughter for Bruce Willis and Demi Moore, revealed that she'd been diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder last summer when she was 29 years old. She said getting the diagnosis completely changed her life. When I was looking into Tallulah's story, she really didn't elaborate as to how having the diagnosis changed her life. But I can just assume, looking at some of the things that she's battled. I know that she's previously battled with anorexia. She's also had struggles with addiction and mental health. And so it might be that certain times in her life she had different struggles, maybe because she struggled socially or struggled to communicate things, or maybe she was overstimulated in certain situations. And so in her situation, maybe knowing about this diagnosis or having interventions applied earlier in her life might have helped her to better be able to adapt to those situations and maybe not go down certain paths that she went down. So let's kind of play devil's advocate with this here. When I talked to my husband, his thoughts were, what's the point? What difference does it make? And there are some people that also fall and have a similar thought process to him. In their minds, being autistic and finding out later in life that you're autistic as opposed to when you're younger, there really is no benefit and no difference because you've already lived it through life, you've already had those experiences, and you already are the person that you are. So now finding out about this diagnosis or getting a quote-unquote label attached to yourself doesn't really make a difference in the grand scheme of your life or how you're going to live. But I tend to be in the second camp that feels like having this diagnosis and finding out this about yourself, especially later in life, can greatly affect or can change maybe how you feel about yourself. It can sometimes even offer up you better understanding yourself or maybe certain struggles you went through because now it makes sense how I acted this way or why I did these things or why I had these certain types of struggles. So let's think about this. Are there any benefits to finding out that you're autistic when you're younger versus when you're older? I can only speak from my experience as a parent of two autistic boys. One of my boys found out he was autistic fairly young, around the 3.5-year, 4-year-old mark. Finding out he was autistic at this stage of his life better helped us to adjust to different behavioral struggles he had, helped us when he had struggles with friendships in school. Even when he transitioned to kindergarten, it made it easier for people and his peers to understand because they knew that Andrew's a little bit different than the rest of us. At 6 years old, kids don't necessarily understand what autism is, but they understood that Andrew took in things differently, responded differently to the world around him, could be easily overstimulated, and maybe could get upset a lot easier. And they were a lot more compassionate, a lot more understanding to if he had a struggle or a bad day. Similarly, teachers were very understanding, and other people in general when they interact with Andrew because they accepted and understood that, hey, he has autism, which affects his ability to communicate struggles he's having, communicate his emotions or how he's feeling. Sometimes he has a hard time with the environment and things being too much for himself. So people were able to make adjustments and they were very understanding because they understood what he was going through. When you contrast that to my son Jason, he didn't find out about his autism until he was in 2nd grade, almost going into 3rd grade. In Jason's experience, because his peers, as far as he knew, saw him as a quote-unquote normal child or no different developmentally than they were. When in 2nd grade he started showing struggles socially and maybe was hiding under his desk or getting upset easily or having extreme meltdowns, it didn't make sense to them. When he would have certain behaviors or kind of talk out in the class or say things or have repetitive behaviors, teachers also took it as he was not listening and having more behavior. So from a parent's point of view, finding out my child had this earlier, it seemed like even from the perspective of how people responded to him and interacted with him and accepted things about them, there was a much more benefit given to Andrew because he was diagnosed earlier in life. People were more accepting of his quirks, people were more understanding of him versus Jason when it happened later because they'd already come to know him a certain way. And when these behaviors started to manifest themselves, they didn't understand. And they looked at him like he's weird or what's wrong with him. So as a parent of two autistic boys, I would 100% saying finding out younger versus older is beneficial because I'm able to adjust my parenting style. When I was able to find out earlier about Andrew's autism, I was able to adjust things for him to make sure that, again, his environment didn't overstimulate him, and also even how I responded when he had meltdowns or when things were, when he had struggles, maybe looking at people or talking to people, I was able to put strategies I learned in place. When you compare that to Jason, when I later found out he had autism, I was able to realize why certain parenting strategies were less effective earlier, and I was able to make those adjustments. So the sooner we know our children have autism, the better we are able to implement things that can help them along the way. And I would also imagine from their perspective, if I were autistic, if I know this about myself, I'm better able to understand why maybe the world is so overstimulating for me, why maybe I have a hard time understanding how to respond in certain situations, why maybe I get so frustrated or I shut down in certain situations and don't know how to respond. So think about on the end of somebody who finds out later in life, older, that they're autistic. Like my husband asked, is there even a benefit? Is there even a reason to find out about a diagnosis? I would say 100% yes. And that is because the more you know about yourself, the better you can understand yourself and things you've been through. Even since having this channel, I've had numerous people comment that, hey, I wasn't diagnosed till I was in my 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and how once I had this diagnosis given, it helped me better understand myself. Or I wish I'd known sooner because I wouldn't have gone through some of the struggles that I'd gone through if I had known earlier that autism was a problem that I was dealing with. If you don't know, I'm a mental health professional, and so I have my own practice. And I've had countless patients that I've identified for their parents that, hey, I suspect your child's autistic. And this might mean where they're in high school or early college years. A lot of times parents come back to me later and like, oh my gosh, when they get the diagnosis and they're 100% like, I am so glad that we found out about this because we had questions. We wondered why maybe our child acted or did something differently, but we never fully understood. And there are even times those patients come back and they're like, thank you for better understanding myself because I've always wondered why I did A or B or why I responded this way or why life was so hard for me. Even just recently, as last week, I had a patient and she's in her mid-30s and she talked about problems with executive functioning and not understanding things and not being able to process through things like other people around her. And she recently found out she was autistic and she said it just made her want to cry getting that diagnosis because it made life make so much more sense for her. And she just expressed that had she known sooner that that was her problem, there could have been things she did so she wouldn't have had all the struggles that she had. There were times she turned to self-medicating with things like drugs or alcohol because she didn't know how to manage the anxiety she felt in certain social situations. Or she didn't understand why certain routines or things for her had to be done certain ways, or life became overwhelming for her. She also didn't understand why she struggled to be in certain social settings or why it was hard for her to interact with certain people, and she kept such a close-knit group of people around her, even when everybody else she knew wanted to get out, interact, and do certain things. And so having this diagnosis just completely opened up her world for her to better understand herself. So is there a benefit to finding out earlier in life versus later in life if you're autistic? In my humble opinion, the earlier the better. The earlier you know, the better interventions can be put in place. So what if I'm older? What if it's later in life? Is there a benefit of getting any testing? Again, I say, no matter what age you are, if you ever suspect you're autistic, it never hurts to get testing done. And if you do find out you're autistic, at least you have clarity to know what exactly it is going on with you. So maybe any past struggles now make sense. As silly as it sounds, sometimes even being able to put a name to something is all that we need. Sometimes that's all that we need to feel better about ourselves and better understand ourselves. And now knowing that you have autism, now you can look into the disorder. Now you're able to look into it to better understand maybe things you can do to make adjustments in your life so going forward you don't continue to have some of those similar struggles. Well, that's all I'll have for today's video. If you enjoyed today's video, please make sure to give it a big thumbs up. If you're not already subscribed to my channel, please make sure to subscribe. I'd love to have you back. I put out new videos twice a month on Sundays, and I don't want you to miss any future uploads. Also, make sure to hit that notification bell so that way you're notified whenever I upload a new video. Have a great day, guys. Bye.